What is up, everybody? We are back at week 1 of the NFL season, almost in the books. We're actually recording this on Monday afternoon, so before Monday Night Football, before we see if Aaron Rodgers can make it more than 4 plays into his second year of his Jets tenure, which I certainly hope he does. Just because I don't like to see players get injured, but also because I may have a lot of money riding on Garrett Wilson having a good season, and so we're really hoping we get more from Aaron Rodgers this year than we did last year. But it was a week 1. I was going to say it was an exciting week 1. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. It was exciting. There were good games, but if you're a fantasy player, if you like offense, there were some middling performances out there. But we're going to talk about that week 1. We're going to really dig into the injuries here in this episode of the Sharp Angles podcast. We're going to do it every single week at 4 Eastern live. You can check us out on Twitter, on YouTube, and we'll be here. And then also obviously in your podcast feeds. And if I'm going to be talking injuries, I'm going to be talking waiver wire. I'm going to be doing that with our injury expert, Mr. Tucker Bagley, who is back. Unfortunately, you have to talk with me again every week, but it's going to be fun. I think Mondays are going to be good as we talk about injuries. I think.
Yeah, I could have gone to medical school and done this for probably a lot more money, but instead I'm here and I get to hang out with you on a Monday afternoon. It's pretty similar. I think I might have come out ahead in that deal.
Yeah, I think so. My mother would disagree with you about the medical school part of that, but that is that's neither here nor there. That's neither here nor there. I do want to talk. Yeah, I do want to talk about week 1 because it was interesting because we did have some exciting games. We had an overtime game. Obviously, Sunday Night Football was, fun. We did have exciting games. The Bills and Cardinals was, an offensive kind of shootout. We had a lot of fun with that. So there were good games, but it felt like overall week 1 was bad on offense. The Sunday games did average 44 points, which is right around where we were last year and the year before that. But those 2 years were also down offensive years from, where we had been. Only 7 teams had more than 225 passing yards. 16 teams averaged at least that last year. So we did not see the passing production. Steve Palazzolo noted there have been 33 passing touchdowns so far this week. Obviously, again, we're recording this prior to Monday Night Football. That would be the lowest since 2019. The lowest was 37 in week 1 of last season. So again, this is a trend we keep seeing. I mean, it's week 1 and it's going to very likely get better. But if you were hoping that we were going to suddenly get a return to the glory days of, the glory fantasy days, at least, of 2020 and 2021, I don't think those are coming back based on what we saw in week 1, Tucker.
No, and you mentioned just a bad week for offense. And some of the teams that did put up points, like a team like the Bears who won, scored 2 points on offense, right? Like their only offensive points came on a 2-point conversion. And, I was kind of looking through potential waiver wire targets last night and seeing, who's out there, who's available, who, may have put up a big week that we weren't expecting. Not a whole lot of big explosive weeks performances. Like, the usual suspects that we've seen. Tyreek Hill obviously had a big week behind that 80-yard touchdown. A couple other big names hit. But for the most part, just offensive production was down across the board. And you mentioned a couple big games like Baltimore, Kansas City on Thursday night was an exciting game. Eagles-Packers on Friday night was pretty exciting. Obviously, the Sunday night game last night going to overtime between Detroit and the Rams was exciting. But, like, for the most part, like, the 1 o'clock games I thought were pretty boring. Like, to the point where at, like, 4 o'clock, I was like, you know what? There's only one game that's one possession game. Like, I can go up. I can grill up some dinner before I get back home for the 4 o'clock games. Like, I don't necessarily feel like I'm missing anything. And if you felt like you had a down fantasy week, I don't think you're alone because I think most people, their scores were down across the board.
Yeah, no, it was not a great fantasy week. Some of the scores we were seeing in DFS contests were not what you would expect to take down a tournament, even like small field tournaments. I will say that, like, heading into the fourth quarter of those 1 p.m. games, there were a lot of close games. To be fair, but yeah, it didn't really flow. It wasn't as exciting as we had hoped. You mentioned looking at the waiver wire that there aren't a ton of good options, and that is just true. This week of the waiver wire, I don't want to say that because the waiver wire column that I write over at Sharp Football Analysts will be live on the site at some point after Monday Night Football and before Tuesday morning. It will be live on the site. I still would really like you to read it, but there is one guy, there's one name, and he was actually in that Kansas City and Baltimore name. We'll talk about him here in a second. But other than that, yeah, you're digging a little bit to try to find the guys you're looking for. But I will say that a lot of times that turns out being, your best work that you do because you're getting guys before the explosion. It's not hard. If a lead running back goes down and he has a clear backup, that's easy money, right? Like we know what's going to happen, but everybody else knows that's going to happen too. And so you're going to have to spend a lot of fab dollars to go and get that player. This week, if you can get ahead of some guys and maybe hope for the best, and we'll talk about a few running backs that, maybe we should be looking at, those are the kind of weeks where you can really get bang for your buck when it comes to fab dollars. So maybe this week ends up being a lot more impactful than we think from a waiver wire perspective, but looking at it just from like the 1,000-foot view, it's not, there aren't a lot of names that stick out to you. I do want to get to that player in just a second. Before we do that though, I want to make mention we had a great day on the site on Sunday. Our NFL bets overall went 23-12. That's 66%. We were 6-2 on Saturday, 75%. In college bets, we were 29-14 overall. If you're part of our all access package, 67%, plus 10.04 units, $100 better over the entire weekend with us would have been up $2,000. So, I mean, we had really good props were good, 8-2 elevated props. We had long shot bets. Jameson Williams, we had Jameson Williams ladder bets last night, which obviously hit. The top one was plus 1,000. So if you put any money on that, you're feeling pretty good. We had a pretty good week. I had a great week from a just pure, my guys doing well, Saquon Barkley, Cooper Kupp, Xavier Worthy, although Xavier Worthy's everybody's guy. I can't claim him. Even Colby Parkinson, who we'll talk about Colby Parkinson's later. Even Colby Parkinson showing up and having a decent day as tight ends go. So it's a good week for us. If you want to get involved in any of that or our betting or fantasy football content, head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com. You can use promo code WEEK2, that's WEEK and the number 2 for a 50% discount on our weekly packages. So make sure you go and check that out. And as always, subscribe to this podcast, go to YouTube, Sharp Football Analysis over at YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube. We really appreciate all of that. I do want to get to the top waiver ad. Who is Isaiah Likely? I'm not, there's no teasing here. I do want to, before we do that though, mention that Lamar Jackson missed practice on Monday, and after practice, Harbaugh came out and said, the injury report comes out on Wednesday, which thanks, John. We really, thanks for that. We really appreciate it. But he was taking pictures with the team. He obviously was playing. He played the entire game. One of his last plays was, unfortunately missing Zay Flowers in the back of the end zone, but, making a very athletic play to even get that throw off. I don't know what the injury could be. I'm not particularly worried, Tucker. Should I be worried about Lamar Jackson?
I'm not, but I just think it's weird because it's a guy who's worn down towards the end of seasons a couple times. I was last year on MVP, but the 2 years before he didn't play a snap in December, and he's getting a little older. He plays a somewhat brash style of football, right? He takes some hits. So if they just came out and said hey, he's not going to practice on Mondays, we're going to take it easy, it's a load management thing, that would make sense to me. Like that's something that's completely normal. But I don't know. It's just the dance makes no sense to me. The idea that John Harbaugh feels that he has to come out and say, well, injury report comes out Wednesday, I can't tell you anything. To me, that's more concerning, that you feel the need to be hiding something as opposed to saying, hey, we have a franchise quarterback who's dealt with injuries in the past, who takes a lot of hits during games. We're going to let him sit this one out on Monday. We don't think a 2-time MVP necessarily needs to be practicing on a Monday after a Thursday game.
Yeah, I mean, but also Harbaugh is going to be the kind of coach that just wants to instill any type of doubt into their opponent. So he's going to want to instill any type of doubt that they can into. I believe they play the Raiders at home this week, if I am remembering correctly. Which I don't know if we really need to play mind game with the Raiders, but here we are. You are 0-1, so I take any edges that you can get.
Can't take any chances.
Yeah, take any edges. Would appreciate that. I do want to talk about, assuming Lamar Jackson's healthy. If Lamar Jackson isn't healthy, obviously everything changes. But assuming Lamar Jackson is healthy, the top waiver ad for this week is Isaiah Likely. He went for 9 catches, 111 yards, and a touchdown against the Chiefs on Thursday night. Almost a second touchdown, a big toe away from a second touchdown that would have won the game for the Ravens. Easily the top tight end scorer of the week. I have a tweet out. You follow me at Summerlin on Twitter, RX. I'm gonna keep calling it Twitter. I have a tweet out that shows the top 12 tight ends by ADP and what they did this week, and it was It was not pretty. Kyle Pitts simply getting into the end zone makes him a fantasy superstar as it pertains to highly drafted tight ends this week. We're going to talk about two of them that are now hurt later on, so not great. So obviously a big game for likely the top one of the week heading into Monday Night Football. We get these kind of performances every single year. We get this guy that shows up, gets a lot of targets, and really the tricky part on the waiver wire is deciding if it's real or not. I'm leaning towards that this is real for likely, and two things make me lean that way. First, they did talk about him getting more involved as the kind of like the third receiver over the offseason. They talked about that, and now we've seen it happen. A lot of times those coach speak things, you go, well, I don't know if I can take this seriously. We saw it happen. He was fourth on the team with 35 routes. He was targeted on a wild 34.3% of his routes, which is like a Tyreek Hill number. That's not going to continue. But he did lead the Ravens in average separation per next gen stats. All of that points to me that he was running a lot of routes. He was getting targets. He was earning those targets with separation. That points to this being real for me. And the second is that Likely and Mark Andrews ran 30 routes together. They played 30 pass plays together with both of them on the field, which again points to they're just going to use Likely as kind of that third receiver. Likely had 8 targets and a 7.88-1 line on those plays, on those 30 plays. Andrews had 0 targets. That's also not going to continue. That's not going to continue either. But he was involved with Andrews on the field from the get-go. This was the plan, and all of that points to this just being real for Likely. So, I mean, obviously he is the top ad. You are going hard after him in leagues in which he's available. He's actually available in a surprising number of leagues. I didn't know even if I would be able to, write him up, but he is available in 90.2% of leagues over at ESPN, which is a surprising number for me because I drafted him a lot in best ball. In fact, things are working out well for me having Likely on those rosters. But if he's available in your league, especially with what we've seen with tight ends, you have to go get him. I'm gonna struggle to go really hard on a tight end with Fab because a running back will show up. A kind of league-changing running back will show up on the waiver wire at some point, and you're going to want to have ammunition to go get that guy. I'm probably going to struggle to go over like 15% on Fab, but if you really need a guy, I mean, this looks real to me. He's in a good offense, assuming Lamar Jackson's healthy. We know what the upside is. If Mark Andrews gets hurt, we obviously know the upside's even higher than that. You have to go after this guy. Like there's nothing to me that says that this isn't the clear number one ad and somebody that I should be prioritizing with my Fab dollars.
Yeah, I mean, this is the classic like week one thing you see every year, right? And it's just kind of funny because it's coming out of a position where no one else has had a big week. Now, someone who maybe has George Kittle on his fantasy team, I reserve the right to say my tight end also had a good week. Luckily, we're doing this before.
Let's see. Let's hope.
Yeah, well, I put a little extra pot on the feed tomorrow morning, whether or not he did well. But yeah, everything you mentioned, the splits with Andrews, I think is really interesting. I mean, it's not just a freak thing with, hey, he broke off a couple of big plays. I mean, he was a clear part of the Ravens' offensive game plan. He was a clear part of the game plan with Andrews on the field as well. This isn't, hey, a backup guy got a couple shots and look at that. I mean, this is something they prioritized in the offseason, in training camp leading up to this point. And it looks like he's, a big part of their game plan moving forward. Like, I don't think he's going to, rip off 9 for 111 every week or get 12 targets every week. But, I mean, this is a guy in a league with not a lot of good tight end one options right now that I think is as good as anybody. He has a shot to, be a top 10 performer at his position.
Yeah, like you mentioned, it's not like Noah Gray. Noah Gray had 3 targets and had more yards than Travis Kelce, but Noah Gray was on the field for I think 10 routes. I'm remembering this all off the top of my head, but like it's not like that situation. He was involved from the get-go, and so yeah, it's a different thing. But again, it could also just be one of those week one things. I don't know why Chris Moore sticks in my mind, but I think that Chris Moore had a wild week one time that we all spent a lot of Fab dollars on, and it didn't work out. Maybe it was a different Jaguar wide receiver. I don't know. There was a Jaguar wide receiver in week one. You can send it in on a postcard. Who I'm thinking of. All right, we're gonna get on and talk about some injuries here. I do want to mention we're mostly focusing on waiver wire in this episode, and so we're gonna do offensive players. That's who we're gonna talk about. Obviously, there were some impactful defensive players who were injured. Derek Brown, most notably, right? That's a massive defensive injury, unfortunately for a Panthers team that that needs all the help they can get at this this point in time. So, like, there are some defensive injuries out there. We won't be talking about them. However, they will be in Tucker's injury recap column, which you can find over at Sharp Football Analysis. So if you're interested in those injuries, go and check that out. It will be interesting. The first injury we have to talk about from an offensive perspective is unfortunately Puka Nacua. Came into the season with a knee injury, seemed to aggravate that knee injury in the first half on Sunday night. I believe the report is that he's week to week. Like, it's not a great looking situation here for Puka Nacua, is it, Tucker?
No, especially because this is him aggravating the injury that he had, right? This isn't a separate injury. This isn't a new injury. It's aggravating the injury that really, hampered him throughout the summer and the offseason. So, yeah, if you're the Rams and you have playoff aspirations as they do, I think they're probably going to be pretty conservative with it. He's already considered week to week, which the fact that happens immediately usually isn't a good sign. He's probably a candidate to go on the IR, possibly sometime this week if they, deem it's going to be 4 weeks or longer. This isn't, what I think is a short-term injury. And as a result, we saw last year, last night, they just went back to what they did the year they won the Super Bowl, and that's target Cooper Kupp 20 times. The biggest winner in this entire situation, it stinks for Puka Nacua. It stinks for people who own him in fantasy. But if you took Cooper Kupp, you're back to the Triple Crown winning Cooper Kupp. He's getting an unreal target share right now in that offense, as he did in the second half last night.
Yeah, I was Team Cooper Kupp, have been Team Cooper Kupp the entire draft season since he was going like late third round in Best Ball Mania over at Underdog, which never really made much sense to me. But yeah, it's one of those things where I wonder if, we kind of saw Kupp last year with his early season injury. Obviously, he didn't play the first 4 games. And then he came back. He didn't, he had some big games, but then it wasn't Cooper Kupp. Like, he didn't necessarily feel right. I wonder if, this team, they did lose on Sunday night, but that's a good loss, that they were able to come back in that second half with all of their offensive line injuries, and they were able to push that to overtime. It didn't work out. They ran out of steam. It happens. The Lions are one of the best teams in the league. The Lions, are one of the favorites for the NFC. So they played them straight up to a draw. That is good news for the Rams. And really, that's good news for their new look defense and what they were able to do to Amon-Ra St. Brown and Laporta and all of, and what they were able to do that Lions offense. So everything's looking up for them. I wonder if they do just take it really slow and try to get Puka back for the part of the season that, that really matters. So that is a concern I have on this situation. You mentioned it. The fantasy winner here is obviously Cooper Kupp. I would very much hope not available on your waiver wire. So if we're looking at players that are actually, available out there, I think that the 2 names we're going to really pay attention to are Demarcus Robinson and Tyler Johnson. Jordan Whittington had a big preseason and learned a lot of buzz in the preseason. I got to the point where I thought he was just going to be the number 3 wide receiver. I don't actually think he ran a route on Sunday Night Football. That's what the numbers say to me. I did see him, I think, get a carry, but he was not involved. In special teams tackle, I do remember his name being called on that for sure. But it was Demarcus Robinson and Tyler Johnson. If you just look at the second half, obviously, Puka didn't play in the second half. Demarcus Robinson ran 22 routes, had 4 targets, 4 catches for 42 yards. Tyler Johnson ran 21 routes, had 5 targets, 4 catches for 77 yards, although there was a little bit fluky of a yards after catch play that skews those numbers a little bit for Johnson. If I'm just looking at the wide receivers, I prefer Robinson here for the same reason that Robinson was drafted in leagues. He was drafted in 15% of ESPN leagues. The reason he was drafted in those leagues is if you look at his usage near the end zone last year, it was actually pretty good. He had 8 targets to the end zone last season, which was second on the team. He had 6 targets in goal to go last season. That was third on the team behind, Kupp and Nacua. And he wasn't even the full-time number 3 wide receiver until later in the season. So, I look at those. Both Johnson and Robinson did have a goal to go target and an end zone target last night. But I look at all of that, and I think that Robinson's going to be more involved around the end zone, and that's why I'm going to be targeting him, most likely as we look at kind of this offense. But both of these guys, especially if you're in deeper leagues, you definitely need to know them. The Rams are going to run a lot of 3 wide receivers. These 3 guys are going to be on the field. They're going to have to throw to somebody other than Kupp at some point. So yeah, they're definitely names you have to know. And then one more thing, I've been banging the Colby Parkinson, drum for the entire offseason. He was only targeted once in the second half with 18 routes, which was surprising, but they were having offensive line issues. I wonder if that played some role, but he was a clear number 3 option in the first half. Given the issues we have at tight end with all of these tight ends, he is my actual target here, especially if you need tight end help. I was very encouraged by what we saw by Parkinson, by his usage, and how far ahead he was of like Davis Allen. So he would actually be my target in this offense. It would be Parkinson, then Robinson, and then Johnson. But all 3 of them, I think, even in shallower leagues, I think you got to take a look at these guys because of what we hope this offense will continue to be, even with Nacua out.
Yeah, he's such a high volume receiver. Even with Cooper Kupp there, he averaged nearly 10 targets a game last year. Obviously, that went down when Kupp got healthier towards the end of the season. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to kind of pick one guy. You mentioned Parkinson makes more sense just because of the positional value there. But I mean, there's a lot of targets kind of on the board for an offense that they didn't really show it the first half of last night. They kind of turned around the second half, but it's an offense that has a very high ceiling. And now all of a sudden you can kind of ride the coattails of one of those guys after, losing such a high volume receiver.
Yeah, I mean, Matthew Stafford, hashtag good. Like, I'm glad we're there. And they get Arizona this week. They're in Arizona this week. And we know that I think we had higher hopes for this Arizona defense, but it seems like it is still one that we are going to be able to attack for fantasy.
First quarter looked good.
Yeah, things went well for a quarter and a half, right? We'll say things went well. Moving on to Jordan Love, obviously another massive injury. This one happened on Friday night in Brazil against Tucker's Eagles. So blame him. I believe that it's his fault that this happened. What's the news on Jordan Love? What are we expecting with him?
Yeah, so it came out. It's a sprained MCL, which I think is probably not best case scenario. Best case scenario, obviously, is always no injury. But based on how distraught he was coming off the field, I saw a lot of people thinking it was more ACL, more season ending. I thought there was a chance it could be high ankle sprain, the way they kind of twisted his leg into the turf. But the fact that it's sprained MCL, same thing. Like, he's definitely considered week to week. He's probably maybe 3 to 6 week kind of injury. So once again, that puts him as a candidate to possibly go on the IR for the next 4 weeks and see how things turn out. But I mean, the season isn't lost for the Packers, but if you hold anybody on that offense right now, if you have Jaden Reed, if you have any of those wide receivers, really anybody except for Josh Jacobs or the running backs there, I don't know. I'm not terribly confident in Malik Willis's ability to command that offense and get those guys the ball. So I think they're the biggest loser in all of this. Like, it stinks if you have Jordan Love, and it stinks for the Packers because I think a lot was riding on him being successful. And obviously their season still rides on him coming back and playing like the guy we saw in the second half of last season. But in the short term, I don't even know if anyone in that offense is necessarily playable.
Yeah, it's really tough. You mentioned Willis. He has 94 career dropbacks. He's taken 15 sacks. 14.9% of his throws have been off target, and he has averaged 5.2 yards per attempt. All 3 of those numbers, like his sack per drop back and those other 2 numbers, would have basically made him the worst quarterback in the league last year. Like, we're talking about Bryce Young. This can't happen. They can't start Malik Willis. Maybe they start Sean Clifford still on their practice squad. Maybe they sign Ryan Tannehill. We've seen, rumors of that. But I mean, we know what the Malik Willis experience is. And like you said, the real fact, I mean, losing Jordan Love is obviously tough. Thankfully, I mean, I don't know if you saw that video on Friday night where it looked like his knee popped. That had me in fear that we were really looking at a season-ending injury, which really is troublesome. But he's going to be back, it seems like, at some point. So that's thankful. You're going to hold all these guys. Tucker Kraft actually would have been there you go. Tucker Kraft would have been an ad for sure for me at tight end if we didn't have this injury. He ran 29 routes to 8 for Luke Musgrave. But to your point, like, that's more of like a wait till Jordan Love gets back kind of thing, because how are you going to trust him with whoever they're going to have at quarterback? So it's a really tough situation. The one thing I'll say though is that the big thing I got wrong this week, at least coming through 1 week, was Jaden Reed. I doubted Jaden Reed all off season. I was wrong. He shoved it in my face. Good for you, Jaden Reed. So I will never tell anybody to sit Jaden Reed ever again. So that's the one that I will not Jaden Reed doesn't matter. I don't care. Well, you will not hear those words come out of my mouth. But everybody else, we are certainly worried about. We got a question here from Maximiliano. Need a tight end. Who should I grab? We talked about it. Isaiah Likely. That's the answer. If he's not available, I'm really leaning towards Colby Parkinson. Think he might get a bump in targets there. And then also lost love at quarterback. Should I grab Stafford or trade Achane for Stroud and Taylor? I mean, Devin Achane, everything you saw from Devin Achane, I shouldn't say everything. The running game didn't work, but how involved he was as a receiver, all of that you really like. We do hear rumblings. I want to ask you about this. There are some rumblings about an injury for Achane. I don't know about that. You're always going to be worried about his injury stuff, but like if you're getting Stroud and Taylor back for Achane, I'd probably make that trade and get Stroud and Taylor. But that's just me. What about that injury stuff for Achane? What have you heard about that?
Yeah, I saw it was more. I think they said at one point it was like undisclosed injury, and then it came out after the game that he kind of tweaked his hamstring. Given his history on injury stuff, which it's never really been a hamstring, he had a foot injury in college, he had an injury last year. But it does worry me a little bit because this is a guy who has really not stayed healthy dating back to college. But I do think it's more of a wait and see kind of thing. Obviously, as John Harbaugh said, and this is my new favorite quote, injury report comes out Wednesday. Just tattoo that on my arms. I think it comes up. Probably he's going to be limited in practice on Wednesday. Maybe he takes a DNP and then increases to limited on Thursday. But I don't think it's going to be either a long-term thing, or if he does miss time, it's just a 1 week precautionary thing because he is so valuable to that offense.
One concern is they do actually, I believe, play on Thursday this week, which has me a little bit worried. But he was talking to reporters after the game. Like, he wouldn't have been talking to reporters after the game if it was a serious injury, right? Like,
no, or they would have noticed something. Like, oh, he was limping. Like, because, those are my favorite reports is so-and-so came out of the locker room with a boot on. I think David Njoku, that was yesterday. He was walking around the locker room with a boot on, or he was on crutches, or his leg was wrapped, or he was in the training room and didn't take questions. The fact that he was just walking around and he was fine and no one seemed to mention it until today, I do think is a somewhat positive sign.
Yeah, it's the same story with Mostert, who, again, I think came back into the game. So we'll see.
He was
Keep tabs on – it was a shoulder, right? Keep tabs on the Miami running backs. See what happens as we go through, the fake practice reports over the next few days, and keep tabs on it. But we'll have to see what happens. All right, let's move on here to David Njoku. You mentioned Njoku left in a boot. It seems like it's a high ankle sprain. What are we looking at here with high ankle sprain? How long do we think we'd be without Njoku if that's really what we're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, usually I would say a high ankle sprain is minimum 3 weeks, probably closer to 4 to 6. If you're really trying to get back fully healthy, I think someone I've seen as high as like 10 or 11 weeks. Like, it really depends on just the actual grade of the injury and how deep it is. Because that's a tough one, right? Like, when you get a high ankle sprain, it's usually forced from the outside of your leg, kind of forcing it in. And that's why I thought that Jordan Love injury was more of a high ankle sprain than a knee. But yeah, I think if you're David Njoku and you're holding him in your fantasy league, it's going to be a little while. Like, he's another guy who I think is a prime IR candidate. It's going to be tough. It's hard to kind of use up your return spots this early in the season when you don't know who's going to get hurt. You don't know how things are going to progress. But he's another guy that I think I wouldn't be surprised if come Friday or Saturday morning when they're making, the roster moves for week 2, he ends up out of the shuffle and on the IR.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. The other part of it that's tough, if you're like trying to decide if I'm going to hold Njoku through this, he was having an okay game. Again, no tight end one that he was drafted as tight end one had a good game. And so he was having a fine game. That play in which he was injured, was obviously, it was a fun angry run kind of play that unfortunately ended with the ankle injury and the way he was tackled. But I mean, this passing game was so bad with Deshaun Watson. It looked so bad against the Cowboys. That are you like, how excited are you to really even chase that? Obviously Jordan Akins looks like he's the next man up, but again, the passing game looks bad. Are we really chasing Jordan Akins? He ran 29 routes, had 4 targets in that game. They have a trip to Jacksonville this week. They get the Giants and Raiders after that. So maybe you chase it with those 2 defenses. Those are 2 defenses we're probably going to be attacking throughout the year. Although I shouldn't say that about the Raiders. The Raiders are, probably going to be much better on defense this year, but the Giants for sure. We are chasing the Giants kind of matchup. But yeah, like I'm not really interested in having any part of this passing game at this point. Like, I'm not interested in Amari Cooper. So it's going to be really tough for me to get excited about Jordan Akins or, if I need to hold Njoku for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe longer than that, it becomes really tough, I think.
Yeah. And you mentioned like they averaged 7 yards a completion, not 7 yards an attempt. It was 7 yards a completion. Their success rate when passing was like 21%. I mean, the Deshaun Watson experiment there, I just think is really, really fascinating because we know why he's playing, right? It's because of the financial aspect. It's because they've guaranteed all this money and he's going to get every last shot to, prove that front office was right. But I mean, if you're a fan of the Browns, if you're in Cleveland or Ohio, or wherever, it's just, I can't imagine. Maybe only the Giants with Daniel Jones, although they can get out of that, I think, much sooner. I can't imagine like just watching your team, and they have a talented defense. They have some weapons. When Nick Chubb comes back, I think their offense is fairly competent. But to see what Deshaun Watson's doing and know like there isn't going to be a change made. He's going to be out there every week as long as he's healthy. It has to be really disappointing.
Will he be like, so they didn't have either of their tackles this week, right? And so maybe you could make some excuses. He averaged 3.8 yards per attempt, which is not good. That's not great. I mean, Caleb Williams would think that would be a career day for Caleb Williams. Unfortunately, I'm not taking a shot. Caleb Williams is going to have much better games, but it was just really funny to watch the entire like aftermath of that game, in which the Bears offense did absolutely nothing. The entire aftermath of that game was Caleb Williams gets his first win. Did he like?
Well, that's what upset me. Like, what was the stat before the number 1 overall pick quarterbacks like 0-14 against the spread?
It's wild.
And their last 14. And he's the one to break it. They scored 2 points offensively. He didn't do anything. He doesn't deserve that.
I think they had a field goal, so we're giving him the field goal too. But he had 93 passing yards. He averaged 3.2 yards per attempt. Not going well. But hey, they got the win. All that matters. Got the win. Packers have this issue with Love. Come on, Bears. You got a shot here. We'll see what happens. But yeah, it's the Watson thing. I don't know. Their team is good. Their overall roster is good. I've said this so many times that their defense is very good. Their offense, especially when Chubb gets back, has a lot of talent on it. How much longer you can go and stare that locker room in the face and say we're going to keep playing Deshaun Watson and we're going to ruin any chance we have in a very tough division, a division that, I say very tough division. 3 of the teams didn't win in week 1, but still a very tough division. The team that did win in week 1 didn't score a touchdown. Just a fun week 1. Really, really great time. But it is a tough division. How long can we keep looking in the face? I don't know, man. You got Jameis there. I don't know. I don't know how long we can do this. All right, let's one more tight end injury. Actually, from that game, Jake Ferguson. This looked really bad when it happened on the field, and it seems like the news we got on Monday is the best possible news based on what we saw on the field on Sunday.
Yeah, he's dealing with a bone bruise and an MCL injury, which you texted me earlier in the day and said that there was a report that he could play this week. Don't necessarily rule him out for week 2. I think I'm going to rule him out for week 2 because I've also seen like it's a week-to-week injury, much like this other guy's. I don't see how, unless he's like the toughest guy in the world, and maybe, hey, if it were December and they were fighting for the playoff lives, or we were going into the NFC title game, which we know the Cowboys don't make it to that, but if for some reason in this fantasy land they're in the NFC title game, like I could see maybe him, putting a brace on it and forcing his way through it. But week 2, I just don't see this is an injury that he's going to be back for week 2 or really week 3. Like I think this is a multiple week injury. That's usually if you're week to week from the jump, you're not going to be back in 6 or 7 days. So I think this is a guy who, we revisit heading into week 4. I don't think he practices this week. He probably doesn't practice next week either.
Yeah, it would be a very quick turnaround for this kind of injury. And especially since the initial reports from ESPN that he could play in week 2 report came from ESPN's Todd Archer, who's a very good reporter. No, like he obviously someone told him that because he's a very good reporter. Nothing against him, obviously. But the report that came out like an hour before that was that he was likely to miss multiple weeks. And so I'm not sure if this is some game that's being played. Like, I don't know what really we're looking at here. The problem with this situation is, unlike the David Njoku situation, this is one that we probably would like to attack if we had like a very clear number 2 tight end, because they have Dak Prescott. Obviously, we think this offense, this passing game, as long as Prescott and CeeDee Lamb are healthy, is probably going to be pretty good. The early returns were pretty good against a very good Cleveland defense that was even better at home, at least last season. But you look at this and you say, who's actually going to be the tight end that's going to kind of step into this role? Will any one tight end step into this role? It kind of doesn't seem like it. If you read kind of the official site and kind of what they said, they talked about a Brevin Spann-Ford who played more than Luke Schoonmaker against Cleveland. We also saw Hunter Lupke get some snaps at tight end. They have another tight end that was out this week because of an injury that could be back next week. Like, I feel like we're going to see a rotation here. I think a lot of people, because he was a second-round pick, I believe he was a second-round pick, Schoonmaker was last year, people are going to kind of lean towards that. But the official site called him like more of a blocker. All of this, like this situation, the Cowboys need pass catchers. They need some people behind CeeDee Lamb, although Brandon Cooks showed up with his touchdown, because that's what Brandon Cooks is apparently going to do for the rest of time. But they need pass catchers. It would be really exciting if we had somebody really step up in this situation when Ferguson, if he's out, we're assuming he's out, but it's tough to pinpoint who that guy actually will be. And so that makes this a difficult situation to attack on the waiver wire.
Yeah, just because they have 2 guys on the depth chart below him. You mentioned like Schoonmaker's a second-round pick from last year, and even though he is more of a blocking tight end, like you don't take a 6th blocker. You don't take a 6th offensive lineman with a second-round pick. You would expect him to contribute something offensively. But he had 9 catches last year. I think he ran 15 routes or played 15 passing plays once Ferguson went out to Spann-Ford's 9, and neither one of them registered a target or a catch. So I don't think either of them are necessarily options in that situation. And maybe you could guess, and maybe you could expect one and kind of ride the coattails of a high-powered offense. But, you look at the weapons they have at receiver, just doesn't seem like it's something they really want to factor in to their offense if Jake Ferguson isn't there. Well, I like Jake Ferguson. I think he's a really talented tight end. But, yeah, I look at their offense. I look, you have CD, you have Brandon Cooks. I think those are the guys who are going to benefit from Jake Ferguson not being there, not necessarily the backup tight ends.
And I mean, they have experience. We know they will just give the ball to CeeDee Lamb. They will just throw the ball to him 20. They will Cooper Kupp. They will just throw the ball to him 20 times. We know that they will do that. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. A little bit disappointing we didn't see either of the Jalens really step up in this game, but also the Cowboys didn't really need to do anything in this game. So I don't know how indicative this game was of what we're going to see moving forward. And so, yeah, that'll be something interesting to watch. One last kind of big injury here with Jordan Addison. I believe I saw that this was an injury to. He came into the year with one kind of foot ankle injury, and I read that this is an injury to the other leg. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, this isn't like a Puka Nacua situation. This is the other foot. This is the other ankle. It said that he avoided major injury and now just feels a lot of soreness in the ankle, which that's something that is exciting. Like, I'm sure it's probably just classified as a low ankle sprain. But right now it's just classified as pretty significant soreness. He doesn't have any structural damage. So that's a positive thing. It's just a matter of, how quickly it comes up. And Kevin O'Connell was quick to point out that he healed quickly from his other ankle injury. So maybe that means he'll come back quickly from this ankle injury. But if you're the Vikings, maybe you don't want to keep rushing a guy back, and maybe they give him an extra week or two to kind of take it easy. But this doesn't seem to be any sort of long-term injury. And quite honestly, like, if he were a limited participant later in the week in practice, like, I could see him being questionable for week 2. That wouldn't necessarily be surprising to me.
Yeah, it didn't seem like they were too particularly worried about the injury. Not saying that he won't miss any time, but also, I mean, if we're talking about not having to do much in a game, the Vikings were chief not having to do much going up against that Giants team. And so, you look at that, you don't really know how motivated they were to, they definitely weren't motivated. He wasn't going back in the game, but you know what I'm saying? Like, this is not the kind of thing where you would have even tried to force him back in. They have a tough matchup this week at home against the 49ers. We assume it'll be a tough matchup. I guess we haven't seen the 49ers defense play yet. But so, it's not a great spot either way. What I will say is I've been driving the Jalen Nailor bandwagon for like 18 months. And so I'm not going to get off of it now that he finally, caught a touchdown here from Sam Darnold in this game. They only threw 24 passes, the Vikings did in this game, so the volume was not going to be there for anybody. I'm not super excited that Nailor ran 12 routes to 13 for Brandon Powell, but that kind of makes sense given, where they're going to be used. Nailor was in on 8 of 10 routes without Addison on the field. Powell was in on 6 of those. I think that Nailor's going to step into that role. They obviously don't have the tight end production. We did see, Johnny Munt and Josh Oliver catch a couple passes each, I think. But we didn't have, they're not going to have that tight end production without TJ Hawkinson. If Addison is out and you play in a deeper league, I'm going to be interested in Jalen Nailor. But that's kind of where we are. Definitely not a priority ad, especially in shallower leagues. I said this was the last one. One more to talk about. Kenneth Walker, I believe, left the game with an ab injury, but he said after the game he was fine. Or do we have much worry about this with Kenneth Walker?
The only worry is he's missed time with an ab injury before, right? I don't think it was last year. I think it was 2 years ago he had an ab injury. Now that I've done this so many years, all the years kind of run together at this point. But this is something he's dealt with before. I don't think it's anything to be worried about long term, but it's just kind of interesting. Like, that's the only flag I would put up. If he hasn't dealt with it before, I wouldn't even think about it because, hey, it happens. You get banged up, and he's a running back. He plays a physical brand of football. He's going to take hits, and he's going to be sore on Monday. But the fact that he's dealt with abdominal injuries before is just something that I would keep an eye on.
Obviously, I mean, for him, the handcuff's very simple. It's Zach Charbonnet, but he is rostered in most leagues. So if he's available in yours and you want to, just take a flyer that maybe, the Walker injury before we get to Wednesday, obviously that's the name for that. I do want to talk about a few non-injury related waivers before we get out of here. Two really interesting backup names, Tank Bigsby and Bucky Irving. Both of them earned more touches than I think we expected coming into this week. Both of their lead running backs, Travis Etienne and Rachaad White, they were drafted this offseason under this premise that they were going to be the clear lead back in their backfield. That is not exactly what happened in this game, but I do want to say there are some like caveats for both of these. Bigsby ended up with 12 carries, the exact same number as Etienne. He got 73 yards on those carries, much more effective with that work. But Etienne played 34 snaps to 17 for Bigsby, and Etienne had a fumble, a Peanut Tillman fumble going into the end zone in that game. I changed the complexion of that game. I believe the very next play was Tyreek Hill, like 80 yards, touchdown. So completely changed the complexion of that game. After that, we saw 5 carries for Bigsby to 3 for Etienne. So, that kind of like made this look a little closer than it was. But I mean, in the first 3 quarters, it was 10 carries for Travis Etienne and it was 9 for Tank Bigsby. That is not what we expected coming into the season. If you bought Etienne feeling like he was just going to be the clear lead back, you can't feel good about that. And I think that you just have to pick up Tank Bigsby, even in shallower leagues, to see what happens, because last year we didn't get a lot of efficiency out of Etienne. And again, offensive line isn't helping him, but we have to see what this happens. With Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, I'm a little less, worried about Rachaad White than maybe I am about Travis Etienne, because when you look at it, we saw that Irving, although he was involved, right, and although he was more effective as a runner, whenever the game was in doubt, Rachaad White had 11 carries and Bucky Irving had 4. And Bucky Irving had 4 carries on the drive that made it 37-14. So, there's a lot of garbage time at play here. White had 6 catches for 75 yards. White was everything we wanted him to be from a usage perspective in the passing game, at least. But I mean, he had, I believe, 40% negative run, 6.7% explosive. Bucky Irving was more explosive. You got to go pick Bucky Irving up if he's available, because, we'll see what happens. Can White continue to just average like 3.4 yards per carry and keep this job? I don't know. But when we're talking about the waiver wire in week 1, and when I said at the top, maybe there are some interesting diamonds in the rough here that you don't have to spend a lot of fab dollars on. These are the 2 guys I'm talking about. Will it work out? I don't know. Hopefully they're not going to cost a ton, and maybe you get ahead of some things if we continue to see more of a workload share than we expect with both of these guys.
Yeah, someone like Rachaad White I find interesting, because you mentioned like he was drafted strictly due to usage, right? Like, I don't think anyone thinks he's that talented of a running back. His numbers from his first 2 years in the NFL have been pretty abysmal, but he has been a fairly decent pass catcher out of the backfield. And he was again yesterday at 6 catches for 75 yards. You look at what Bucky Irving did, and he only got 9 carries. He averaged 6.9 yards per carry, but that's a pretty small sample size. I think it's interesting because if he proves to be more talented than Rachaad White, like, I don't think it's going to take a whole lot for him to cut into Rachaad White's carries. The issue for me in that kind of split and that handcuff is how much is Rachaad White being used as a pass catcher? Because if they think he's still effective in that, and like I said, he was yesterday, I'm curious as to how high Bucky Irving's ceiling can be if he's not on the field on third down, and they don't think he can be as effective as Rachaad White in the passing game, no matter how much better he is, between the tackles running the football.
Yeah, to that point, and I actually need to make a point about something Todd Bowles said that I forgot to mention. But to your point, Rachaad White, while he has been very inefficient as a runner and has been now we're going on season 3, right? He has been consistently good in the passing game. He was advertised, coming out that he was going to be very good in the passing game. He was as advertised in that respect last year, and then like you mentioned, it certainly happened this year. What I will say is that I believe Todd Bowles came out, or maybe it was Liam Cohen, one of the coaches came out and said something about, well, we're ride the hot hand at running back, which whenever that's said to you, and then you kind of file that back in your head. Because again, with this coach speak stuff, like I mentioned with the Isaiah Likely, we're going to get him more involved. We're going to use him as a chess piece, I believe is the quote for Isaiah Likely. That coach speak stuff, you go, I don't know about all that. But you put it in the back of your head. And now we see Bucky Irving get the carries that he did in this game. And it's certainly something to note. Again, when the game was in doubt, it was still very heavily tilted towards Rachaad White. That is promising for Rachaad White moving forward. But as you say, how much longer can you just be ineffective as a runner and continue to get those carries? That's really the question we have here. I mean, some other names to know. You can read about all these in my waiver column over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Alexander Mattison scored a touchdown. We're back, baby. Alexander Mattison is here. I'm not going to talk too much about him. Greg Dortch, had a ton of targets for the Cardinals. He didn't play a ton of snaps. I think that we're going to see more from Marvin Harrison. Greg Dortch had a 30.8% target rate per route, which I believe would have been second in the league among qualifying receivers last year. I doubt that continues for Greg Dortch. I bet we see more from Marvin Harrison, but still, something to know. Greg Dortch gets targets. Greg Dortch produces. I've said that exact line on here, like on this podcast, like 5 times, because it is true. That is how Greg Dortch is. I do want to talk a little bit about Adonai Mitchell and Alex Pierce, because I think this whole situation with Anthony Richardson is interesting. Richardson only had 24 dropbacks against the Texans, which, when you have Michael Pittman there, who obviously didn't have a great game, when Josh Downs gets back, it's going to be hard for anybody to really live on those. Alex Pierce obviously was the guy this week. He ran 20 routes. He connected on the long ones. 3 catches for 125 yards and a touchdown. But Adonai Mitchell was on the field for 18 of those 24 dropbacks. 1 target should have been a walk-in touchdown. Another deep one might have been if it was thrown better. Like, I think that both of these guys, if you pick them up, you're just playing roulette at some point and hoping that the long pass happens to hit them. I mean, Ashton Doolin had a long kind of catch and run touchdown in this game. He only played 4 routes, right? So if you're picking up either of these guys, you're playing roulette. But Adonai Mitchell, I think, is a better player. And the fact that he's already playing this much makes me feel good about him. So I would probably lean that way, even though Alex Pierce had the big game. But either way, like both of these guys, with this offense, with Richardson, we know what he can do. He can throw that pass to Pierce that was like off balance and launched down the field and was unbelievable. And then very shortly after that, completely miss Mitchell wide open for a walk-in touchdown. That's who Anthony Richardson is. It's going to be a little frustrating for his receivers. It's going to be wonderful if you have Anthony Richardson on your fantasy team, but you can't be confident in either of these guys, and that makes it really hard to go, all in on them on the waiver wire.
Yeah, I mean, outside of Pittman, who got 8 targets, like there's just, you mentioned, they're between the 3 guys, those other 3 wide receivers, just a matter of who the quarterback hits. It's not like, Adonai Mitchell was second on the team in targets. He had 1 catch for 2 yards. Pierce got 3 targets and just so happened to have, catch be on the receiving end of, the best throw on Sunday for a quarterback who was, 9 of 19, completed less than 50% of his passes. But I think one in fantasy, he had, 2 passing touchdowns and ran for 56 yards and another touchdown. Like, he had an unbelievable fantasy day, and a day where quarterback play was, pretty dreadful across the board. He stepped up there. But, if you're a receiver, it's just so tough because he's such a high variance player. There isn't going to be a large number of passes, I don't think, in this offense for the most part. You mentioned he only dropped back 24 times, only threw the ball 19. And I think for this offense and for him, like, he's not completing 65 to 70% of those passes. So if you're only looking at, 11 or 12 completions a game, he only had 9 yesterday. Good luck trying to figure out where they're going to go. I think, half of them will go to Pittman and the other half are going to be divided among 3 dudes.
Yeah, and the tight ends, of which there are probably still 6 tight ends on the Indianapolis roster. It was so funny that Collinsworth, there's a Stafford throw where he kind of it was an anticipation throw. It was off the back foot. It was a good throw. But Collinsworth said, "Oh, that's the throw of Sunday." And I said, "Well, you didn't watch Anthony Richardson because that
went for 6 yards."
Throw was wild. I don't know how he's able to do that. Like, that is just wild levels of athleticism that I can't even fathom. Wild level of arm strength. Actually, that'd be fun. Anthony Richardson, Joe Milton. We should get that. Do you remember that old quarterback competition in which they would throw the longest? They'd see who could throw the furthest, and they do the accuracy challenge. We need to get that. We need to see who can throw the furthest. I'd be very interested in that. By the way, I do a waiver column over at Sharp Football Analysts. It's completely free. You can go and check it out. Like I said, it should be up sometime after Monday Night Football. Between the end of Monday Night Football and Tuesday morning, it will be available on the website. Every time I used to do a waiver wire column, it would always get the degenerates that would say, "None of these guys are available in my league." Fair. I understand, degenerates. I am a degenerate like you. In that column for running backs and wide receivers, you will find a deep cut section that has only players who are available in at least 95% of ESPN leagues. Some of them are available in 99.9% of leagues as Devon I don't know if it's Devon Vell or Devon Vele is for the Denver Broncos. He was the number 3 receiver for the Broncos. Marvin Mims ran 8 routes. Pour some out for Marvin Mims. It's not going to happen. But he ran 39 routes, 15 for little Jordan Humphrey. He had a target on 27.6% of his routes. Vele did. That's not going to continue, but that was tied for second on the team with 8 targets, just 2.13 air yards per target. So you're not very excited about that from like a upside potential, but that really fits Bo Nix and what we saw from Bo Nix in this game against Seattle. If he's going to get a lot of targets like that, if he's going to be the number 3 receiver and kind of in those areas getting targeted, he got talked up all preseason as well, so that makes this feel like a little bit more valid. Then he's definitely worth a look in deep leagues, maybe even shallower PPR formats to just kind of see what happens. So there you go, DGens. There's your deep cut for this week, along with Colby Parkinson. Colby Parkinson's available in like 96% of leagues or something like that. This is officially a Colby Parkinson's podcast. Colby Parkinson podcast.
I think he's been the most mentioned name. Totally.
He probably has. I think I've mentioned his name.
Begin with Colby Parkinson and end with Colby Parkinson.
That's how all good podcasts should go. Do you know how to say Devon's last name? Is it Vele? I think it's Vele. I think I'm remembering hearing it said, but I don't know.
I think that sounds right. It sounds better at least. I'd rather that. Like, if he has the choice, I would go with that.
Yeah. Again, put it on a postcard, send it in, and we'll figure out how to say his name. That's going to be it for us. Like I said, we're going to be back every week at 4 p.m. Eastern on Mondays, talking about injuries, talking about the waiver wire, hopefully moving forward a more impactful waiver wire. Although I don't want to say that because then that means somebody got hurt. I don't want people to get hurt. Hopefully the waiver wire is as boring as this and everybody stays healthy for the rest of the season. That's most likely not going to happen. So show up here and we'll help you with the waiver wire. But like I said, you can find my column over at Sharp Football Analysis. You can find this podcast wherever you listen to, subscribe, head over to YouTube, Sharp Football Analysis YouTube, subscribe there. We would really, really appreciate that. If you head over to the website, like I said, we had a really good week in the NFL betting and fantasy. You can get a 1-week subscription or weekly subscription. Get that for 50% off using promo code WEEK2, WEEK, and the number 2. You can get 25% off our season packages using code TAKE25. A bunch of good values over there at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Check that out, and we will be back to talk with you real soon.